Hello and welcome back to another episode of Notion Bonsai, and today we're going to be repotting this Lonicera, also known as a hedging honeysuckle. We're just going to be giving it a routine repot to set it up for the next growing season. Okay, so this is the tree that we're going to be working on in this video today, and as you can see, it's sort of looking like a little classic bonsai tree now. I have been working on this tree now for a couple of years, and I do have videos on my channel about this tree. So if you would like to check out the progression of this tree to see how it got to where it is today, I will leave a link to the playlist of this tree in the description of this video. This tree is now in refinement and beginning to sort of figure out where the pads are going to be, figure out the structure of the tree, but it is still nowhere near where I want this tree to be. What I really like about this species is that it is so resilient and robust and vigorously growing. These things grow almost like weeds here in the garden. They just pop up everywhere. This one I think actually started as a weed growing alongside an apple tree, and I just ripped it out and put it into a pot. So it is a great species for beginners because they're kind of hard to kill. They grow super fast, so you can get really good results in a short amount of time. And on top of that, I really love the nice, small, delicate, sort of waxy green leaves that have this nice deep green color to them. And also the texture of the bark of these trees, especially this one, looks really nice and gnarled, and it's got this sort of twisting nature to it in this one, which I really like. Now before you repot, you want to make sure it's the right time of year. So for me right now, it is early spring. Today is the 21st of February 2025. You know it is a good time to repot and start repotting if your trees start pushing out new growth. The buds are just beginning to open. This is when the energy moves up into the tree from the roots, and then it is safe to do some root work. So as you can see on this one, it's got little leaves popping out. It's starting to put growth on the top. Depending on where you live, your trees may appear dormant still at this time of year. If this is the case for you, I would just wait a little bit longer until they show some signs of growth on the top before moving on to repotting. And now before we begin, the tools that I will be using in this video today are a chopstick, a bonsai root rake, or you can use a bent fork, some bonsai tweezers, root pruning shears, root cutters, some wire cutters, and some gin pliers. And as always, by no means do you need all of these specialized bonsai tools. If you're just getting started in bonsai, you can get by with a cheap pair of garden scissors or some secateurs. Just whatever tools that you have at your disposal to get a particular job done. For sure, bonsai tools do make things a lot easier. Although whatever tool that you are using, ensure that it is clean and sharp. Clean so we don't introduce any bacterial or fungal infections to our trees, and sharp because a sharp pair of scissors and a sharp blade will give you a much cleaner cut on a branch. And in horticulture, clean cuts heal so much faster and more efficiently than a blunt cut that was squashed by a dull blade. So here I am just taking this big drip tray. This is to catch any mess or soil that might fall out as we work on the tree. And at this point, whenever I begin first working on a tree, the first thing I usually do is take the tweezers and go in and start taking out all the weeds individually. But because we're repotting today, you don't really need to do this. We're going to be raking away that soil anyway, so we can save ourselves a little bit of time there. Now the first thing I want to do is take the tree out of the pot. I'm just going to loosen this up a little here. So I'm just beginning by just pulling on the tree, and if it doesn't move, don't force it. But I did remove the wire from the last time I repotted this, so that's not what's keeping the tree in the pot. I'm going to take these tweezers, which have a little spatula on the end. I'm just going to push down the sides of the pot to see if we can release it from the walls. I would also like to emphasize that you only really want to repot a tree when it is starting to become pot bound. That is when the roots completely fill the pot and they have nowhere else to go. If you have your bonsai and you pull it out of the pot and the roots are sort of dangling, the soil is loose and the roots haven't filled the pot, I recommend putting it back into the pot, make sure it's nicely repotted, and then come back next year and see if it has filled the pot. So now let's give this tree a go, see if we can get it out of the pot. It's a lot looser now. As you can see, okay, this one is really beginning to get pot bound. It's not fully pot bound, but if you look at the bottom, look how many roots there are there. This is just absolutely packed with roots at the bottom. So this tree is in definite need of a repot. Then taking the chopstick, I'm going to just gently rake the soil outward. And all I want to do here is simply untangle the roots and also just loosen up the old soil. And as you can see, when I'm using the chopstick, I'm working outward from the trunk. Never do I want to tear across the roots like this. I'm spinning the tree around, working outward. You can take the bent fork. I find with smaller trees like this, the bent fork actually does a much better job than something like the root rake because the spokes on this are further apart. So when you do this, it isn't as precise, but when you take the bent fork, you can really get in and loosen it up. So now that I have loosened up the top part of the soil, I'm going to turn the tree over, and just like we did on the top, I am going to work outward from the center of the root ball. And I also want to add that all these roots that grew here are only in the last 1 year. If I had left this go another year, it would have seriously become really pot bound. And this is again because this species, the Lonicera, is just so vigorously growing. They grow super fast, so you really got to keep on top of these ones every year, especially when they're younger trees like this. As they get older, they do slow down a little, but you just have to really keep an eye on them. It's okay if you tear some roots like this. We are going to be cutting the roots anyway. So now that I've loosened up a lot of the old soil, as you can see, it's just roots. Just to finish this up and clean it up, I'm going to give these roots a little wash in some water. So the roots have all now been nice and washed. We've got rid of most of the old soil, and as you can see now, the roots are a lot easier to manage. So what I'm going to do is just take this tree, sit it down nice and flat, and I'm going to come in again with the bent fork, and all I'm going to do is rake these roots radially so that they're all nice and spread out. Whenever we grow bonsai, we want to encourage nice lateral growing roots that flare outward from the trunk. And you also want it to flare, it's sort of a nice curving motion down into the soil. You never want it to go sort of down and then straight out because it can look really unnatural and forced. So we're trying to encourage this nice flow whenever we make our root pruning decisions. So I've got all this nice and raked out. And when doing root work like this, it's really important to keep a spray bottle of water nearby as you work on the roots. Especially if it's a sunny or even windy day, these roots can quite easily dry out being exposed to the air. We're just going to give these a nice mist with water if they ever do start to dry out. Because any roots that dry out are essentially dead, and we really don't want that. So it's really important to keep your roots nice and hydrated. So before we start doing any sort of major root work, I'm first going to do a profile cut, and that is just, this is how we want it to fit into the pot next time. So I'm just going to take these scissors and just cut around the inside of the pot, just like this. If I spin this around, there's an extra long piece here, cut that in. So now when it sits into this pot, as you can see, there's lots of room around the edges for the roots to grow into in the next year. Now I'm going to go in and do more detailed root pruning. So just going through this root ball, I can see here on this side, the root density is just a little bit sparse. As you can see, there's like a hole right through there. I would like more roots in this area, so I'm not going to do anything on this side. Let's just spin this around. And again, we're trying to encourage nice lateral growing roots. So this one here growing outward from the trunk is really good. This one's good here, but there's one like under here, as you can see. It's like winding around. It must have hit the side of the pot and then just started to curl. I'm going to take this out. Can I bend it back into position? I would like it to come around that way, but with problems like this, I'm just going to cut them off. Cut it at the point in which it begins to curl. Where I've cut this, new smaller roots will come from here. Let's just spin this around, all nice and lateral. There isn't really much work to do on this tree. The root base is really nice how I like it. And you will notice that the more you work on roots year by year, there will be less and less things you have to do to make it better. This root here is just a little high, so I'm going to cut that off. There's a little problem here that could become a problem in the future, and it's that there's a root crossing over the top of another. So before this gets worse and thickens, let's just get rid of that. That's that gone. So I'm really happy with this. Now just taking a look at the underside of the root ball. This looks all nice to me. There's not any overly thick roots. I know in bonsai we don't want many roots growing straight down, but for this tree and most trees, it's okay to have just a little bit of them going straight down, especially with this one because there's a lot of nice fine feeder roots down here. And feeder roots are these just nice thin ones that actually provide water and nutrients to the tree. With most trees, any roots that are on the thicker side, they're more for stability and don't really feed the foliage. Now I'm faced with the decision, do I put this tree back into the same pot? Just taking this tree and putting it into this pot, as you can see. I just want to show you the difference the energy of a pot can make. So this one's nice and wide. It's just as wide as the canopy. Even if I move this just slightly off center, it looks nice and balanced in this pot, which I think it looks pretty nice. But if we were to swap out the pot just for a moment and try this completely different unglazed rectangular pot, which is more or less the opposite of a glazed rounded pot, and we put this tree into here, it is a completely different effect. In a way, I think this looks a little bit more elegant because of the nature of the tree. It has these curving lines. Putting it into a curving pot, everything sort of looks the same. But if you've got a tree that has curvy lines and you offset the curves with a rectangular pot that has sharp edges, it can give you a more sort of interesting look, I think anyway. I could also be biased because I've also been looking at this tree for the last year in this pot. Maybe just personally to me, seeing it in something new is just refreshing mentally. It's a tricky one, but I think I'm gonna put it into this rectangular one, maybe just for another year. And if I think I wanna change my mind next year, I can always swap back to something like this. So now I'm just going to prepare the pot. And to do this, I'm gonna use some bonsai mesh. Sometimes I like to use some mesh tape. This is just a tape that they use in like the plastering industry. Cut it, stick it down, it does the job. But with nice pots like this, I like to go with a bonsai mesh that's a little bit tougher. It can go down and it really won't get eaten by the roots in time. It really just depends on the circumstance for me as to which I use. I'm just cutting this mesh into two. Then I'm going to take this little piece of scrap bonsai wire, cut a little length. The simplest way to do this with the wire is just to make a U shape like that. Then with the mesh, if you're using bonsai mesh, there will be a flat side and a bumpy side. Make sure the flat side is going to face down. That way it sits nice and flat along the pot. You put this wire through the mesh, and then from here, we're going to put this through the bottom of the pot. And then to keep it in place, we simply flatten it down. And if you would like to make it just a little bit neater, you can come in with your wire cutters and just shorten this down. That way it looks nice and neat. It's really important that whenever you're working with soil that you do sieve out all of the fines, because any little fine particles that's in the soil mix, when you put it into the pot, when you water it, they're all going to settle to the bottom and sometimes they can clog up the pot. And the soil mix that I'm using in this video today is a mix of pumice, akadama and lava rock. And I think in this particular mix, because it's the fine grit one, I got some zeolite also. And this sort of helps with a better cation exchange, which is how much nutrients the soil can hold and distribute into the roots. But even just getting a really nice mix of pumice, akadama and lava rock, I find gives my soil here, especially because it rains so much for me, it gives it a really nice balance of water and oxygen. Now to just finish preparing this pot, I'm going to take a little bit of wire. I like to measure it up the sides of the pot like this. I'll cut that here. Then I'm just going to take this and feed it up through the bottom of the pot. So this wire is what will be used to anchor the tree in place. Now just taking some of our soil, I'm just going to make a little mountain in the middle. And I'm going to mount it up pretty high because this is going to be pushed down anyways. So don't be afraid of making the little mountain too high. Then I'm going to take our tree and I'm just going to push it down on this. And the point of making a little mountain like this is just to ensure that there's no air pockets under the root ball. And we can just squeeze this down like this. Now I don't want this to be too deep in the pot because the roots will then get sort of a right angle effect where it comes down and straight out. Another thing to consider is the planting angle. If you want it more tilted this way or this way. I'm really happy with how this is looking here. Let me just rotate this and see if there's a better front. That looks quite nice as a front there because not only does it show the trunk line, but you also see more of the pads. So I think that's where I'm going to have the tree sitting. Another thing that I didn't mention is whenever you choose the pot, have the front of the pot of the side with the least imperfections, because some pots have little dents and cracks and scrapes. If you put all the bad things and imperfections to the back and things you don't think look quite nice, then it will look a lot nicer. These roots just still aren't fitting, so I'm just going to cut a little bit off because we did profile cut this tree to a different pot. Another thing to consider is the tilt of the tree. Do you want it tilted more forward or back? I like it how it is just right there. And once you have everything in place, I like to go in with more soil. I like to do soil first before wiring it into place, because as you work the soil in, you can really anchor and secure the tree where it is. And then the wire is more so just to stop it falling out if it gets blown over or something. Just to make sure that there's no air gaps and pockets in the soil where water cannot reach, we're just going to use a chopstick and fill in all the bigger gaps. really feel any big air pockets anymore. We're going to take the wire that we put in. Just make sure it's not going to crush any of these nice laterally growing roots, so you might have to move some roots out of the way just to get it up over to the trunk. Same with this one, nice and over here. Now if I were to go ahead and tighten this down onto this, I do risk scarring some of these nice branches or even the trunk of the tree, because I want to tighten this down just nice and firmly. Here you can really put anything to protect the tree as it's held in place. You can use a little piece of rubber tubing over the wire. You can use a piece of denim from an old pair of jeans. Here I've got just a little piece of fabric from an old t-shirt. I'm just going to fold it in half, double it up a few times, that way it's nice and padded. And we can just take this, make sure that's nice the whole way around where the wire is going to be in contact. And then with the gin pliers, we can just tighten that in place. So I'm pulling up and twisting, pull up and twist. If you want to, you can cut off these ends with the wire cutters. I'm not going to, just so it's a little bit easier to remove. You can just push them down. And as a final thing I like to do, I'm just going to take some sphagnum moss and put this on the top layer of the soil. And this just helps keeps the upper roots nice and moist as lower ones develop. I'm not going to keep this on here too long. This will be removed as I see new growth on the top of this tree. But for now, I'm just going to keep a nice light layer of sphagnum on the pot. And putting this on top also just helps keep the humidity levels up. All that's left to do now is give this tree a water. And there you guys have it. On that, I'm going to end off this video right here. If you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like on this video. It really helps out the channel a lot with the YouTube algorithm. And we just hit 70,000 subscribers, which I am so grateful for. Thank you so much for supporting my channel. Please let me know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your guys' ideas. If you even have any tips for me on how to repot better, I am always open to new and different ideas in bonsai. If you would like to support me and the things that I do on this channel, hit the thanks button down below. Or if you would like to become a channel member, hit the join button. That way you will get early access to new videos before they go out to everyone else, and you will get access to membership posts. But on that, thank you so very much for watching.